You've likely seen it in the movies, hundreds of warriors heroically charging the walls under a hail of arrows. Massive catapults shatter towers with a single hit, while defenders run frantically around the courtyard. A real medieval siege was far less spectacular. Today, we will break down 4 major myths that prevent us from understanding how fortresses were actually captured. In films, soldiers simply lean ladders against the walls and briskly climb to the top. In reality, this was practically the least popular method of attack. To begin with, crafting a ladder of the exact required height is quite a task. If it is even a meter too short, the attacker becomes a perfect target, unable to even reach the top of the wall. If the ladder is too heavy, it is nearly impossible to raise it under aimed fire. Most importantly, the defenders at the top didn't just stand there waiting for the enemy to reach them. They had special heavy forked poles used to simply push the ladders away from the walls, along with everyone hanging on them. Ladders were only used when there were almost no defenders left on the wall, or for a sudden night raid while the sentries were fast asleep.
Moving on to the next myth. Remember how in movies, stones from trebuchets spectacularly punch huge breaches in walls with the very first volley? In reality, castle walls were built to withstand colossal mechanical pressure. The thickness of the masonry could reach 3 or even 5 meters of solid stone. Attempting to break through such a wall with frontal strikes from heavy stones could drag on for many weeks. Artillery of that time was more of a tool of psychological pressure than destruction. The most effective way to bring down a wall was the so-called undermining or sapping. Sappers dug a deep tunnel under the tower's foundation, propping it up with temporary wooden beams. Then the tunnel was stuffed with brushwood and dry straw and set on fire. When the beams burned away, the massive wall simply collapsed into the void under its own weight. Let's move to the third myth, the final assault on the fortress by the entire army. However, for a real commander of that era, a direct assault was a sign of extreme desperation or stupidity. Why lose your precious trained army if you can simply wait? Diplomacy and common bribery played a much larger role in sieges than infantry or cavalry attacks. In most cases, the victor needed the captured castle intact and functional, not as a pile of useless smoking ruins. Therefore, a typical siege consisted of long months of tedious waiting in camp and endless negotiations.
You've definitely heard this popular fact. All spiral staircases in castles are wound strictly clockwise. Supposedly, this gave a right-handed defender an advantage while hindering the attacker's sword swing due to the central pillar. This is one of the most famous and beautiful myths about medieval architecture, and it sounds very logical. In reality, if you walk through actual European castles, you will find hundreds of staircases wound the wrong way. Medieval builders were often guided by the landscape, foundation specifics, and layout convenience rather than fencing tricks. Moreover, in the cramped space of a stone staircase, there isn't much room to swing a sword for either a right-hander or a left-hander. There is simply no space. Combat in such tight quarters turned into chaotic pushing and shoving, where the direction of the spiral played no role. Real medieval knights likely didn't rely on the direction of the steps as their main ace in defending the citadel. The main defenses were the walls and gates. The staircase was simply a way to get from one floor to another. That's all for today. I hope you learned something new. Let me know in the comments which facts you'd like to see debunked in future videos.